Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we hope you'll like us, subscribe, maybe even support us on Patreon. And I just want to mention that we're going full speed ahead with our plans to take a retreat trip to Bali. And if you're interested in getting more detail on that, leave us a note on the website, yourspiritualjourneypodcast.com, and I'll get all the details to you. But we're really looking forward to that retreat, and we expect a lot of our past guests to be on that retreat. So today's guest is somebody I've known for quite a while. Ronni Weiss was born in Philadelphia and lived there until she graduated high school. She attended Simmons College in Boston and moved to Pittsburgh in 1973. Professionally, she worked in the social work area and counseling fields until she retired. Music has been an ongoing and important part of her life, and since retiring, she has more time to devote to it. In addition, Ronni has been part of environmental organizations, food justice initiatives, and women's rights groups, to name a few. She has one daughter and one grandson, both living in Pittsburgh. If you're from the Pittsburgh area, you may have seen her at a number of different venues because she has sung just the ones that I'm aware of because I've heard her sing at these venues. Mary's Vine, the Greenfield Greenhouse, the Blue Sky Bar, Kitchen and Bar,
which, no longer exists.
Point Breezeway. And
the bridge was another one.
The bridge, which is no longer
the number
open.
Of them are no longer, yes.
Yeah, yes. So you may have run into Ronni and her voice. We do have her CD on display, so if you're watching on YouTube, you can see what that's all about. But Ronni, I'm going to ask you to go through your spiritual journey from childhood till now, and then we'll get to some questions. The mic's all yours.
All right. Well, I was raised, as I said, in Philadelphia. I was raised in the Jewish tradition, and it was a very important part of my upbringing. I lived across the street from the synagogue. I was bas mitzvahed, went to Jewish-related summer camps. I was very observant. I was part of the youth program there, and it was an important part of my life. It meant a lot to me at the time. I will say, though I was observant, I was always sort of skeptical about God. Probably one of those, show me kind of people. When I left home after I graduated high school, I really had enough of my Judaism. I really felt like I had been inundated with it. The neighborhood I lived in was Jewish. My parents' friends were Jewish. Everybody I knew was Jewish. And when I left home, I kind of left it behind. I went to college in Boston. After college is when I met my first husband, and that's how I ended up in Pittsburgh. So in my early years of marriage, I didn't really have what you would call a religion.
Were you married in a church or a synagogue?
I was married by a justice of the peace at the Webster Hall Hotel, which is in Oakland, which is no longer the hotel. Now I think it's Pitt Dorms now, but yeah, it was a secular ceremony. I really didn't want anything to do with religion. I had a real hard time with the actual word God. I never knew what anybody meant when they said it, and I kind of didn't trust what people might mean when they said it. So it was just an interesting thing. I had a
Yeah.
difficult time with the word. My daughter, when in my first marriage, I had my child, and when I separated from my first husband, my daughter was about 6 or 7, and I think, in part because I felt like I needed a sense of community, and in part because I thought that maybe my daughter should be exposed to some sort of religious
Hmm.
environment, I started going to the Unitarian Universalist Church. And I chose them because they felt like the most secular of the
Yeah.
churches. They didn't
Okay.
use that word, all of their music, everything, and it talked about something bigger. Like I always believed, I called it a higher self. I always believed that there was something more, but I just didn't like putting a word to it. So the Unitarian Universalist Church fit pretty well with where I was at that time
Hmm.
in my life. Um, I went there for a while, and then I didn't really feel like I was getting what I needed from that organization. It was I agreed with the people um, politically. I agreed with, and it was they were doing things of service, which I think is very important in a church
Hmm.
related group. But I just didn't feel like my soul, we'll call it, was being nourished. And it happened that I knew a woman who was a jazz singer whose music I really, really loved. And I found out that she was the musician at the Center for Spiritual Living, which no longer exists in Pittsburgh, but at the time, um, maybe this was probably in the 90s, I'd say.
Yeah.
Um, so I started going to the Center for Spiritual Living, and I really liked what they had to say. And they talked about divinity, and they talked about the universe, and I started becoming a little more comfortable with the word God. They also used the concept of Christ consciousness. Now, being raised as a Jewish person, Christ was not in my
Right.
wheelhouse, but if that's the right word. But I always used to, I always believed in the best in people, and I always believed in our higher essence. And I always believed the teachings of Christ as the words, but
Hmm.
I just didn't study the New Testament at all.
Right.
So I liked the Center for Spiritual Living. Um, and so I started to go there pretty regularly. Um, when the minister retired, they were in sort of financial difficulties, and so the center closed. But the Center for Spiritual Living was very similar to Unity. In its Center for Spiritual Living was Ernest Holmes' Science of Mind, a little bit. Unity mm, maybe was a little more touchy feely is the
Yeah.
word I'm going to use. Center Spiritual Living was more like a cerebral thing. Um,
Now, was your daughter going with you at that time?
no,
Okay.
no, no. Yeah, my daughter is sort of non-religious. My
Okay.
daughter may be an atheist. I'm not entirely sure, but there hasn't been religiousness for my daughter or my grandson.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was doing that on my own. Um, the musician at Unity, they had a ongoing musician retired, and so they needed musicians. And someone I knew from the Spiritual Center for Spiritual Living knew I was a musician, so that's how I ended up at Unity. So
Aha.
music really took me into these spiritual places that I ended up at, and I really liked what Unity had to say. And so that's kind of where I am now. If I go
Yeah.
to a church, it's usually Unity. Although I've told you this before, I like to check different places
Yeah.
out. I call myself a spiritual tourist. I just like to see what other people have to say.
Yeah.
Um, The other thing I should probably add in terms of my um, reactiveness to the word God is that for many years I worked in a women's clinic where we did abortions, and we had, a lot of very angry, unkind people out front who called themselves Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And that, just kind of reinforced my antipathy to the organized notion of, religion.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
guess that answers that. I think there were years in between. I was thinking about it at home, years in between where I wasn't really involved with anything. But
Yeah.
um, I did like, for example, I did like to go to Christmas service every year.
Yeah.
Like just like some other, Christian types that just go once a year, I
Yeah.
guess. And I think the community was a real draw because I was a single mom, and you know, living on my own, and needing to have some sense of community. So that maybe even more than the religious aspect of it was a draw that kind of kept me coming.
Yeah. So the music part of you, uh, and I know that you say that since you've retired, you've really had time to devote to that, and it's come out a lot more. But it seems to me then if you ended up at Unity and somebody knowing that you had a music background, how did that music express yourself or express itself up to that point before you retired and could devote time to it?
Well, growing up, I always sang. I was in glee club at school. I was in the choir at the synagogue. I always sang. I always loved to sing. I took piano lessons sporadically in my life.
Uh-huh.
When I was 8 years old, I took piano lessons. When I was 16, I took them. So at different points in time, I took piano lessons, but my singing always felt like it was my better skill, my more natural skill. Or,
Uh-huh.
you know, and I didn't have to practice so much. With piano, I had to
Yeah.
practice, and I didn't like to practice. Um, in college, I was part of a 8 or 9. I went to a women's college. I was part of it, like an 8 or 9 women's group, and we sang pop tunes. So I went to college in Boston from 1967 to 1971. So it was the peace and love hippie era. And Boston, though it really wasn't comparable to San Francisco, it was kind of the San Francisco on the East Coast because there was lots of colleges there. So, it was, politically active,
Yeah.
the war was going on. And in Boston was kind of a hip place, and coffee houses, they were called then, not coffee shops. Coffee houses were
Yeah.
just kind of springing up. So this group that I was with, we would sing in coffee houses. We would sing at different college campuses, and we sang a cappella, real nice 4-part harmony. So that happened, in my college years. When I moved to Pittsburgh, I joined another group of women. Well, this was really in the 80s. So there was a number of years where I probably wasn't doing much. And there was about 12 of us, and we also did a cappella stuff, but we were led by a professional choir director. We weren't a choir though. But we sang. They were called madrigals. It's like old English music, just unusual kind of stuff, but nice, real nice. And we always sang Christmas, nice Christmas stuff. So we had some nice gigs at like the Carnegie Library and the Hall of Trees at Christmas, and in the Stephen Foster Center, in front of they used to have Shakespeare plays.
Right.
We would sing this madrigal stuff. So we had a lot of stuff going on with that group. Up until that time, though, I was always singing harmonies. I was never singing as a solo singer.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't think of myself that way. And then, so that would have been like the 1980s, I guess. Then in the mid-90s, I met some guys and started getting together with them, and I guess we were in the basement. You would call it a garage band. But that was like the first time in my life, so I was in my mid-40s by this time, that I realized that I could sing by myself.
Yeah.
And that was also when I started playing piano with the singing, because all the guys played guitar and I could play a little bit of guitar. They didn't need a guitarist.
Right.
So I started playing piano. And so I did that for years. That was my first time using microphones, using amplifiers, all that stuff.
Yeah. So that garage band, though, did play gigs around the
Well,
city,
no,
right?
they didn't.
No?
No, they
Okay.
didn't. Much as I wanted them to, they didn't. Now some of the members do, but I'm not part of that group anymore. But no, we just got together once a week and just jammed
Oh,
every Friday
okay.
night. And I did that, for 10 years. And at that point, I really felt like I wanted to start performing. And I don't know, I just kind of met a few kind of extraneous people, did a few gigs here and there. I did I have a partner that I met in like 2004 or 5, no, 6 maybe. And he and I started doing more gigs in restaurants, some farmers markets. So we started doing some things more in public.
Yeah.
But what really opened me up was in 2011 when I went to a music camp in Elkins, West Virginia. It's called Augusta. It was it'd been around for years, and I didn't know about it. And it was more kind of acoustic, traditional blues, bluegrass. I think they had a clogging week, dancing, But one week they had a blues week, and I found out about it, and I went. It was all acoustic, though. It was not with amplifiers, and it was kind of old-timey blues, like I don't know, like Blind Lemon Jefferson and Robert Johnson, people that, used to take cigar boxes and make guitars out of them, And when I went, they had different tracks you could go on, and I went for vocals, and it was 2011, and I had been singing by myself, for a number of years before that, but they just really thought I was extraordinary. I mean, it was like, people were really, really complimentary to me about my voice. And so I got real, excited. And that's when I came back to Pittsburgh, that's when I started, just going all over the city, trying to find any place I could sing. There was lots of jams in the city, lots of jazz jams where, if they know you can sing, there's a band and they'll invite you up.
Yeah.
So, since 2011, and I went back to that camp every year for 7 years.
Oh.
For a week.
Okay.
And I also went to New Orleans to a music camp for a week for 2 summers in a row for the New Orleans traditional jazz kind of thing. So I guess 2011 is when I really started making the effort to put myself out there real consistently.
Yeah.
That's the long story.
Well,
I guess we have time, right?
There you go. Well, the story is the story. That's why we're here.
So so I really came to it later than some. A lot of musicians start when they're really young, and are kind of really hitting their stride in their 30s, in their 20s, and I sort of hit my stride in my 50s and 60s, I'd say. And now.
And you're definitely hitting your stride now.
Trying.
Trying. I guess when Amy and I met you, and we met you through spiritual groups.
Right.
And why don't we talk about that for a minute? Because this spiritual path that you've been on is more than saying finding unity and being aligned with the beliefs that unity purports to have, and the tenets that you find there. One of those groups has to do with A Course in Miracles. So how does that fit into the overall picture of your spirituality?
Yeah, that's that. Well, I have always, so I've watched your podcast before, and often there are people who have had spiritual experiences early or at some point in their life, and maybe they've had it early and they've had to put it aside because it wasn't a natural thing. It wasn't acceptable at the time, to say that you might be conversing with spirit or something like that. So I think of myself as a very down to earth. I mean, if I'm an earth sign, if that has anything to do with anything. I'm a Virgo. I'm an earth sign. But and I think that this is my thought of spirituality. I was thinking about it, and I didn't really know what spirituality meant for a very long time. But I always felt that there was something internal that was unique to each person.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know exactly what to call it. And I have always been an idealist in my way of seeing things. So, it may have been enhanced because I went to college during the peace and love era.
Uh-huh.
But, I've always felt that we get answers from somewhere. Some people call it conscience, which I think is probably another way to see it. I also was a social worker in my life, so I've always believed in the best in people.
Mm-hmm.
I have always believed that. I was not taught that. It's just something that I always felt. And, kind of in my work as a social worker, I came to decide that people were born or came into this world, good, kind,
Mm-hmm.
and then things happened along the way. I use the word tarnish, that tarnished their essence. And so maybe they lost it. But I always believed in what I learned is the spirit, but I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that spirituality meant that
Yeah.
until later. So when I became a member of Unity,
Mm-hmm.
it was before the pandemic, and there was a man named Vince Lisi, who you've had on, who used to come once a month to Unity and talk. And he also led the book study. What's the name of the book?
A Course in Miracles.
No, it wasn't.
Oh.
No.
A different.
Yeah. Oh God. Well, it'll come to me. You know what it is. It'll come to me. He didn't lead A Course in Miracles at Unity. It was the other book study at Unity that met once a month. The oh my God. Anyway, we'll think of it. But he came once a month, and every time he came, I really liked what he had to say. I really always liked what he had to say. And he led the book, Alchemy, Mastering Alchemy.
Oh, yes.
That was the book he led.
Okay.
Wasn't that the book we studied, Mastering Alchemy?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And I really just liked him and liked what he had to say. And he has his whole, spiritual organization, and he does lots of book studies. And so he was doing a book called A Course in Miracles, which I had sort of heard of, but really didn't know anything about, had never read. And before the pandemic, he would have meetings at his house, and he was in Ohio, and occasionally I would go to his house and sit in on the meetings. And there was something about the book that just really appealed to me. I'm not sure if I can articulate it. Well, I certainly believe in the divinity within. And, you know, one of the things about A Course in Miracles, I think that is kind of a main tenet, is that we're brought up in certain ways, and that's why we act the way we do. We're brought up with certain fears, and we're brought up to believe certain things, and we're really, in order to get back to our essence, we have to undo a lot of that. And A Course in Miracles, one of the things that it, kind of talks about is, looking at things without any kind of backstory, without any kind of judgment. Like, I see, just looking at it as an essence, kind of. So I started studying the book with him. What I have forgotten to say, which I think is probably the main thing that has convinced me and made me have faith, is when quantum physics came along and stated that everything is energy. Yeah. Because I couldn't, I was being asked to accept things, and I was a skeptic, and it was just hard for me to accept certain things. And when that came along, so that's probably the biggest thing that led to my feeling more comfortable, more believing in spirituality, is when that notion of everything being energy became accepted. And, I still don't know everything, I don't know. And, but I trust a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge, who tell me that this is actually the truth, that everything is vibrating. And I do think that. And so if everything is vibrating and everything is energy, then it's not what I think it is. A chair is not a chair. It's some sort of, matter. And we learned that in grade school, atoms and space, and, but, it was always difficult to not assume that, something was solid when you saw it. So that's probably, I think, I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's probably, that's the biggest, that statement has had the biggest impact on my way of thinking and seeing spirituality, and how I feel that I personally can impact the energy in the world.
So that was your aha moment. You did have one.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you can't pinpoint the date, but you did have one.
Right. I mean, so, I haven't, interacted with, I haven't, been able to interact with, the higher beings, that kind of thing. But, I do, if, with all religion, with anything almost, there's a fundamental thing that you have to accept. And then you can build an entire story on top of it. And unfortunately, you can build a totally wrong story on top of it, as long as you believe this first tenet. And so I have decided that I believe that everything is energy. And therefore I can build my system on it. Yeah. And be comfortable with it, and think that it's the truth. In addition to people who I trust, who I think, have had experiences that are true, that say things that I trust and I don't have to see.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so you made the leap
I made a
from
leap.
from that tenet
Okay.
to it showed you how you can impact the world. So talk
Slick,
about
Bob, slick.
well, you said it.
I know I said it. I said it. You're very slick. Right? That's good. That's good.
Okay.
That's good host. Good host.
So how did that happen? And how are you impacting the world?
Oh, all right. Well, I mean, impacting. So I I think that people, we have certain gifts. I think that, everybody has their strengths. Gift might be too spiritual a word. Strength. So, somebody can have, have strength, have a very excellent way of doing numbers. And so, they can they can bring their business acumen into the world and do it in an ethical way. So that's a way to impact the world. So I have always felt that I have a kind of a social worker. It's what I like. It's what I enjoy. It's what nourishes me. It brings me joy to be of help. So that's one. So now that I'm retired, particularly, I do a lot of volunteer things that I hope will, make the world a better place, or however you want to say it. As far as my music goes, well, I do. The music that I do is always has a positive feel to it, a positive message to it, positive energy to it. I don't necessarily shy away from, well, I probably don't really sing about difficult. I don't sing depressing music. I don't sing sad. I don't think it's helpful. It's not what I want to give. It's not what I want to introduce into the energy system. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
So the music that I do is always an effort to uplift. It may not be religious, but I hope that it leaves people feeling good at any rate. That's with the music. That's one way. I haven't written a lot of songs. I have written some. And the pandemic, me along with a lot of other people, forced me to have more time with myself, as it did with a lot of people.
Right.
And for me, well, one of the benefits of the pandemic was the Zoom situation, because then I could, do a lot more spiritual work. I didn't have to drive places. I could look, so I could have that spirituality connection more frequently with Vince that I liked, and with a group that I do with you. But I had more time. I just had more time on my hands in general. And so I started writing more songs.
Yeah.
And I worked with a guy, Shane McLaughlin, who's in a wonderful group called Buffalo Rose that performs all over. And he's an excellent songwriter, and I knew him. And we would meet on Zoom, and I had to come up with stuff, because I was going to meet with him every 2 weeks, and I had to have something. So, I was disciplined, because I had to be. And so, over the years of the pandemic, I wrote a bunch of songs, and I found that some of them had a little bit of a spiritual flavor to them. Like other songs, the songs I had written before. No, let me back it up. I mean, when you write a song, just like anything that you write, there is a message you're trying to convey. Right. Yeah. So my songs did have messages. I hadn't written very many, but some of them were funny. But over the pandemic, I found that there was just a little bit more spirituality that was coming into the songs I was writing. And so that, I think it's sort of, they sort of started mixing in.
Mm-hmm.
And, probably 3 or 4 years ago, I had made CDs in the past, and I had a few original songs that were on there. They were solo CDs, and I decided that I wanted to do a CD of all original music. Started thinking about it probably three or four. Well, the pandemic's 5 years now. Maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I started thinking about it because I was writing these songs. I'm getting older. You think about when you're not here and what you might want to leave behind, and I wanted it to be all original songs. And so a year ago, maybe a little more, I started working on it, and this was the most complex CD I had done in terms of other musicians and the recording of it and all that. So I completed it, and there it is. Dream. So but yeah, but and I think I would like to write more songs. I mean, and I have songs that are kind of in the works, and
I hope we don't need another pandemic for you to do this.
No, right. I hope not too. Have to do a little self-discipline instead of external discipline. But I guess I don't know if I don't remember what your question was. I went off somewhere, and maybe you can bring us back to the topic here.
It had to do with that sneaky question about, okay, I figured out that everything's energy, and now I can affect the world.
Mm-hmm.
So the question was, how are you affecting the world?
So I don't know. Well, Vince Lisi said something that stuck with me that has been very helpful to me in general. And that is that individually, the energy we put out is going to affect the energy in the world. Because years ago, when I was younger and on social worker and, doing demonstrations and marches and all that, and trying to figure out, exactly whose suffering I should be addressing to make the most impact.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so many things that need to be done to make the world, better. And so sometimes it would be paralyzing because, I would want to do something that would, directly make me feel that I was making an impact. But it was hard to know, do I go on a march? Do I do a demonstration? Do I deliver food to somebody's house? What do I do? And the notion of who I am in my essence as an energy body, just being conscious of, it's kind of, hackneyed or whatever to say if you smile at somebody, but there's a truth to it.
Right.
And so for me, as, like an idealist, like do-gooder, bleeding heart, whatever you want to call me, it's very helpful to feel that even if I do something small, it can have an effect, So not to say that I don't have plenty of moments, but the more aware I can make myself, the more useful I can be and the better energy I can put out and affect the energy. And it was really helpful to me when Vince Lisi made that comment. So thank you, Vince.
Yeah.
It was really, it just helped settle me that I didn't have to run here and run there and do this and do that, that if I was being that way, that in and of itself was useful. So.
Yeah. Knowing that you are love.
Well, I guess. I'm still
You're not owning that one
No,
yet?
I'm still a little, I think I probably use different words. I think those words, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure about that. I mean, I believe it to be true. I think I have different ways of thinking about it, maybe. I don't know what they might be.
Okay.
Love is another one of those words that has too many definitions for me.
Yeah.
Like God. So it's not, you know, I might want to use the word good as or, I don't know,
Kind.
you
Yeah.
know, like a, you know, as opposed, yeah. I'm certainly not at the unconditional love place. I will say that. I'm not, I'm not unconditionally loving quite yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Catalina would beg to differ with you on that one.
That's my cat. Oh, I don't know. I don't know. She always wants to play, and I'm probably not the mother she would really like the best, but she's yeah.
Okay. I promised you I wouldn't hit you with any difficult
Oh,
questions that
okay.
I didn't make you aware of.
Is there a but following this?
Well,
That's where that's always where the truth comes. What comes after the but is the truth.
yeah.
Blah blah blah. But and then comes the real truth. Okay, I'm ready.
All right. Uh, if you're living on this earth, whoever you are,
Okay.
you've experienced trauma one way or another.
Okay.
And I know that you've experienced, like anybody else, a few traumas.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something about what you have discovered spiritually that has provided you with a perspective on those traumas that's helped you release them or not kept them inside so much?
Well, I'm going to start out by saying that I had a wonderful childhood. I had a very, very good foundation, which I believe was more instrumental in my ability to come through trauma than spirituality.
Okay.
That's first piece. Two-parent family. I felt loved. I felt protected. My upbringing was safe. It was predictable. I had the kind of upbringing. Of course, I've had my share of therapy. I've had I have parent issues like we all do, but I believe that the kind of childhood that I had is the kind of childhood that a child ought to have.
Yeah.
And so I think internally I felt safe, and I felt that the world, and I trusted the world, because one can trust the world, or I don't think somebody, maybe Einstein, somebody said either you see the world as your friend or not. I don't know who, but I've heard it, and I know someone important said it. So I trusted the world, and I trusted people. And I think that's also why I believed in the general good about people, because I didn't have experiences, with parents where, things were unpredictable and dangerous. And, unfortunately, so many things happen to children at ages when they can't process any of it. And I believe it gets locked in the cells. And that's the kind of stuff that can be really traumatic. And I think depending on when it happens to you, at what age, what kind of support you have, makes it more or less difficult to release.
Well, and being a social worker, you probably saw a lot of that.
I did.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, I don't really think it was spirituality that was probably the most instrumental in helping me, quote, bounce back from the things that happened to me.
Yeah.
I think it was inherently, I had a good foundation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I did have my share of trauma. I had some rough times. I like the notion. It, one of the things that I guess spirituality has, brought to my attention is that, difficult situations are important lessons. Now, not everybody can come through them, and not everybody can come out the other side okay. And the hope is that if that's the case in the next life, it's better.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, and maybe it's impacted by my spirituality, I'm not sure. Some of the things I went through, of course, the things you go through make you who you are. So some of the things I went through were very helpful in allowing me to, understand things about, we'll call it human nature. I have a counseling background in addition to my social work. So, those kind of, and I have been in therapy. So those kinds of things probably have been more helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
As far as spirituality goes, I mean, I think what my spirituality has helped me with is being less afraid of dying.
Uh-huh.
In terms of trauma, I'm not sure that I can I don't really think that I can make that necessarily that connection. But what I do think my spirituality has helped me with is being less afraid of dying.
Yeah.
I do believe in reincarnation, and if I don't know what happens, so I think I'm uncertain, about what happens. But if I accept the premise that everything is energy, and if I accept the second scientific premise that energy can't be destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
then my energy cannot be destroyed after death. So if
Right.
I'm willing to believe those two things,
Mm-hmm.
it helps me not be so afraid of death. Not to say that the actual transitioning. Well, and then there's all these people that talk about, they've met their people and and I don't think these people are, these are people that I believe, they're
Mm-hmm.
people just like me. I don't think, they're saying things that are in any way hard for me to, comprehend, or they're charlatans in some way.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say. So that's not really trauma.
Yeah.
Although I used to be terrified of death. I'm sure lots of people are terrified of death. I found it hard to believe that anybody wouldn't be terrified of death. So that's, so my spirituality has one could think of that as a traumatic way of seeing things if I'm trying to tease out,
Yeah.
make the answer fit the question. But I would say that it's been helpful in that way.
Yeah. So you're an eternal being, and that
I
makes life so much easier.
well, it's it makes me less afraid. I also like another thing. I like another concept that Vince Lisi has talked about, which is old souls, baby souls, young. He has this concept of, the number. I guess it has to do with the number of times you've been here, what you've learned each time, and so you might meet someone who's 12 years old who has a lot of wisdom, and they're like an old soul. You might meet someone who's 50 who does not have much wisdom and has not learned from experience, and they're kind of a young soul. And so, I like that. I like that notion. the other notion that really serves me, and I'm not sure where it came from, is that, well, I do believe that we all create our own reality. I believe there are external factors that happen. I'm not entirely sure about the notion that I create those, although that is one of the tenets of the situation. I can allow for it. I'm just not quite sold on it. But it helps me to be less judgmental. And the social work world helped me with this too, is when I understand that everyone is in fact living in their own perception of reality. And that's the other thing about the spirituality stuff, is that I've always believed this. I've kind of known this, but spirituality sort of articulated it. I've known things inherently, but wouldn't know how to articulate it. That everybody's doing the best they can, I do believe. And, when I don't understand someone's behavior, the way I make it make sense to me is to understand that they have their reality, which is their world, and they're behaving from their perception of reality. And so I find that helpful in trying to, not be judgmental.
Yeah.
To me, it's logical. Things have to make sense to me.
Yeah.
And they have, and also feel right, but it has to make sense, which I think is my earthiness, maybe.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I interviewed someone who's very Catholic. He's evangelical Catholic, actually. And he talked about logical Catholicism. And I had never heard that term before, so I sort of dug into that and said, okay, what do you mean by logical Catholicism?
Yeah.
And he said, well, if you think about the tenets of the Catholic Church, they're just logical. And so that was something deep down inside of him from his reality, his perception of reality, that just made all the sense in the world. And he would have a hard time understanding why other people didn't see the logic, in what he had to say. But coming from that belief, there's no arguing with him, because he's got this perception that all of this is logical, and because this is truth, this is truth, this is truth, this is truth, and if you add those up, this is what it means.
Right.
So, to me, whatever somebody's spirituality is and their perception of reality, it's logical to them.
That's the truth.
Makes all the sense in the world.
That's the truth. That helps you understand why there's things that you just don't get, but it makes sense to the person. It has to make sense, because people don't act. I mean, unless things are really off, for whatever reason, people don't generally act in ways that are going to harm themselves, unless they have chosen, because life is too painful. So, yeah. But yeah. One thing that I didn't mention that I probably ought to is that one of the things, I always believed in the principles of Christ. I didn't know that probably until I got out of my Judaism, just because I wasn't exposed to it. But I always, believed in, love and compassion and, the stuff that, in my opinion, how can anybody argue with?
Yeah.
So that's my perception. I mean, how can you not want love? I mean, how can you not want someone to be kind to you? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me, but it makes sense to some people, because it does, But I like that Jesus was the man and Christ is the consciousness. I like the term Christ consciousness, because to me that's the same as like Buddhahood or Hindu, any of the big, avatars, and Jesus was the Christ was not his last name. I used to say, it doesn't matter to me who Jesus's father was.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't matter to me. It matters to me what was said. So if his father was God or if his father was someone else, it's the philosophy, which is, I guess, a very sacrilegious thing to say in certain circles, but I was raised Jewish too, so
Yeah.
but that was just jumping from the prior conversation, that was a big draw for me for unity. I think was, that's the term they used, which was easier for me to relate to than, for example, Buddhism, just from my personal experience. So
yeah. So let's get to your CD.
Okay.
And
it can it can be seen, I'm assuming.
Well, if
should I hold it up?
There, we can see it now. Okay.
There it was.
Yeah. So
real quick.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the cover of the CD. As someone who has never written a song, although I have written some poetry, and I know that in writing poetry, frequently I've felt that what I wrote wasn't anything that I had much to do with, other than being a channel for what was coming through me. So it makes me want to ask the question, where do these songs come from that you're writing?
Well, if anything, I might get a little snippet of an idea that I'm not sure where it comes from. Okay. An inspiration, we'll call it.
Okay.
A snippet. Mm-hmm. But I don't have things flow through me like I don't sit down and have and just feel this movement through me onto the paper.
Okay.
No. I think probably little ideas come to me, just like a little idea will come to me. And then I sit down and I work on it. And it's a conscious. Now, when I was, it's very conscious. I don't feel like I don't feel it like I'm channeling. I don't feel like I don't feel that. Although I will start to pay attention maybe and see, because it just may be that I haven't paid attention to it, and that's what happened. Yeah. I mean, when I was writing songs with Shane, yeah. He gave me he said take these 4 chords and use this as your musical basis and write something. Yeah. So sometimes if I'm sitting at the piano and fooling around a little bit, there will be something that sounds good.
Okay.
That my hands are just moving around. So I'm not, it's not a particular thing and it'll sound good. So that might be something I base it on. But I think that for the most part, it's probably a fairly laborious, changing words, now, and then there's some songs, like the song I wrote about the iPhone. There's some songs that if you pick a word, there are so many words that rhyme with it that you can just go on and on and on. So but still, you're still
Yeah.
consciously working it. So, and I haven't, I think in my life, I've probably written altogether, finished, I don't know, 20 songs,
Okay.
and I'm older. I mean, there are people who write a song a day, you
Yeah.
know. So I never thought of myself as a songwriter, although I have written songs. Like you might not identify yourself as a poet,
Right.
although you have written poetry,
Right.
So yeah, I wouldn't say it comes
Yeah.
from a
And that was
channel.
my other question then. Which comes first, the chords or the words?
And it's not an either or.
Okay.
It's I mean, and sometimes I'll be out in nature and I'll be, well, like I wrote a song about the winter. It was a very cold day, but it was one of those beautiful bright sunny days, and there was snow on the ground, and it was, and I just like took everything that I saw and wrote a song about it.
Uh-huh.
So probably, if the music comes first, it's because I'm singing it, not because I'm playing the piano.
Uh-huh.
So if it's the music part of it,
Yeah.
as opposed, if it's the music part of it as opposed to the words, it's because I'm singing, not playing. I figure out the chords afterwards once I got the song. But I remember the song I wrote for my late husband Ed. The song is called "I'm Still Your Gal," and those words came to me.
Yeah.
I remember the song I wrote for my mother. What came to me was DOTTEE. That came to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote the song around it. So,
Yeah.
there's always an inspiration. I guess it just depends on how much of what you're doing is
Yeah.
inspired without a lot of effort, or what piece of it is inspired and then you work on it.
Yeah.
I would think that would be kind of a continuum to
Yeah.
answer the question.
Well, and I think those are two very good examples of what could be seen as a sad situation. Your late husband, Ed, and your mother, who has passed, and you wrote these beautiful, uplifting songs around them.
Mm.
So I think that's a great example of what you said, that I don't focus on the sadness. I don't focus on the negative. I focus on the positive and the beautiful.
Well, yeah, I don't want anybody to feel worse after I've left. I don't want anybody to feel that they don't like the music. Okay, they didn't like the music, but I don't want to. And I remember this was, my very first solo gig was in 2006.
Uh-huh.
I was by myself. Before that, and I was in a coffee shop. It was in Squirrel Hill. It used to be called the Tay Cafe, but it's not that anymore. And one of the songs I used to sing that I didn't write, but it was called "Ain't Gonna Worry," written by a woman named Sue Foley, and it was a real up tempo, And me, anxiety was a problem for many years. It still, hangs in there, but it's a lot better. And it was about just, don't worry, it doesn't do you any good, which is good advice if you can take it,
Yeah.
But it was just a really just a real bouncy. No, I ain't gonna worry. I don't have any money. I don't have a job. I can't. But I'm not gonna worry about it, And I was and it was in this coffee shop, and I was done, and people were walking out, saying goodbye, and somebody that I didn't know, this couple in the back, they were just there. He came up to me and he said, "Thank you so much." He said, "That song really helped me." And it was like, I don't know if I hadn't consciously put it together that music, because everybody says music is uplifting. Music, it's the language of the soul. Everyone, kind of knows that, but it was so like rewarding to me, that this actually helped him feel better, because obviously he was worried about something, and now he hopefully wasn't going to worry, maybe for 10 minutes, and then he'd start again. But, you know, at any
Yeah,
rate,
sure.
and it was just like, yeah, so I don't ever want to leave people feeling worse.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of music that I mean, and it's, I don't mean to be Pollyanna-ish,
Uh-huh.
you know, because God, you know, I mean, there's plenty of things to feel sad about, but I don't want to add, and that goes along with with my theory of everything being energy,
Yeah.
you know, because if I put something out and somebody else feels a little better, then they'll be putting that out and on and on.
Right.
So it, you know, it fits into the,
It's got
fits
that
into the
ripple
thing.
effect. Yeah.
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 Well, and you thought we couldn't fill an hour.
Oh my God.
So, audience, I'm just going to say that Ronni and I agreed in advance that the words of wisdom she's going to leave with
Oh,
you
goodness, I forgot about this.
are going to be sung. So this will give you a taste of Ronnie's music. And if you're interested in pursuing it further, as always, I will have contact information on my website, yourspiritualjourney.com. And under the tab Resources, you'll see some information about Ronnie's work and how to get in touch with that work.
Oh boy, I had an idea of what I was going to sing, but I hope this is a hard song to sing. You know, the trouble with writing stuff or singing stuff is if you let yourself get too involved in it, because you know you want to emote, you want to be believable.
Mm-hmm.
If you let yourself get too involved, there's a chance you'll start crying, and that's never good with a performance.
Oh, but it's fine on the show.
No,
We've
we're
had
not. No.
lots of people
Oh,
in
all right,
tears.
let's see if I can do it.
Okay.
All right, so this song is called Enough, and this was this has a spiritual meaning to it, and the last part of it goes, let's see. Well, I am all I need, and I can choose just what I feed myself along the way. It's time to call my bluff. I have it all. I am enough just as I am today. It's always been that way. That's it.
So, audience,
Thank
as
you.
always,
Thank you.
take what resonates with you, incorporate it into your life, and put the rest on the shelf until you're ready to deal with it. Until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.